In episode 1, Mensah proved something the world wasn't ready to believe. That memory loss might not be permanent, but proving it in a lab was the easy part, because what came next was a system designed to stop him. Applying for human clinical trials in the United Kingdom requires navigating one of the most rigorous regulatory frameworks in the world. This is not a complaint. It is the system working as intended, designed to protect patients from the well-meaning but potentially catastrophic consequences of undertested medical devices. AO's application is 340 pages long. It is reviewed by a committee of 12 medical and ethics professionals. The initial response is a request for additional data, 6 specific areas where the committee requires deeper evidence. AO and Professor Okonkwo spend 6 weeks generating it. The second response is another request. Different areas. 8 this time. Here is what the committee does not know, and what AO does not tell them, because it is not their business and because it would compromise the scientific integrity of the process. One of the potential trial participants whose profile most closely matches the device's target application is living in Handsworth, Birmingham, in the house where AO grew up. He does not advocate for her inclusion. He does not use her case to push the process forward. He files the right paperwork, answers the right questions, and waits. Because the process exists for a reason, and AO Mensah, for all his impatience with accepted limits, has enormous respect for the difference between a rule that protects people and a rule that merely inconveniences them. In month 28 of AO's work on Synapse, the NHS Research Ethics Committee grants full approval for a Phase 1 human clinical trial. The trial will involve 12 participants with early to mid-stage Alzheimer's disease, conducted under the joint supervision of the University of Birmingham's Neuroscience Department and the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, Birmingham. Professor Okonkwo, against the advice of the university's press office who want to manage the announcement carefully and slowly, issues a press release the same day. Her reasoning: the research community needs to know this exists. The public deserves to know this is being tried. And AO deserves credit before anyone else tries to claim the landscape. The press release is covered by the BBC within 4 hours. By the following morning it is in every major newspaper in the United Kingdom and several in Europe and North America. The headline that runs in The Guardian reads, 20-year-old Birmingham student wins approval for revolutionary Alzheimer's brain device. AO reads it on his phone on the bus to the university and feels, for the first time in 3 years of relentless, focused, grief-driven work, something that is unambiguously, simply glad. His mother is on the trial list. He has not told her yet. He will tell her this morning. The Phase 1 trial begins on a Monday in the spring. 12 patients. All early to mid-stage Alzheimer's. All with family members who have signed consent forms and who understand, clearly, that this is a first-in-human trial of a device that has never been implanted in a living person. The risk is real. The potential is extraordinary. Every family in that trial room has done the same calculation and arrived at the same conclusion. The disease they are facing is already the worst-case scenario. This is the chance that the worst case is not the only case. AO is not the lead clinician. He is 20 years old and his medical qualification extends to his undergraduate degree in neuroscience, not a surgical license. The lead surgeon is Professor David Chin, 58 years old, head of neurosurgery at QEB, who agreed to work with AO after reading the trial documentation and spending 4 hours asking technical questions that AO answered without hesitation. On the first day of the trial, as the first patient is prepared for the procedure, AO stands outside the operating theater in scrubs he is not allowed to wear inside. He is not allowed inside. He knows this. He stands in the corridor and he breathes. Somewhere in this hospital, in a different ward, his mother is scheduled for her own procedure next week. He does not think about that right now. He thinks about the 12 people inside those rooms. He thinks about the neurons that are not dead, just alone. At the 6-week follow-up assessment, 3 of the 12 trial participants show measurable improvement in standardized memory function tests. Not stabilization. Improvement. One participant, a retired schoolteacher named Margaret, 71 years old, correctly recalls the name of her first primary school, a detail she has been unable to retrieve for 2 years. The clinical team is cautious, as they should be. 6 weeks is early. 3 of 12 is a small sample. The improvement could be a placebo effect. It could be temporary. Every scientific caveat that belongs in the room is in the room. The lead clinician, Professor Chin, carefully annotates every finding with the appropriate uncertainty qualifiers. Margaret's daughter is in the room for the assessment. When Margaret says the school name, correctly, clearly, without prompting, her daughter covers her mouth with both hands. She does not make a sound. She just sits there with her hands over her mouth, and her eyes closed, and tears running down her face. AO is in the corner of the room with a clipboard. He writes down the finding. He dates it. He initials it. He does not look up from the clipboard for 30 seconds. When he does, his own eyes are red. He is 20 years old and he has just watched his device give a woman back a piece of her memory. He takes a breath. He writes it down again, neatly, in case the first entry was not clear enough. Grace Mensah's Synapse implantation procedure takes place on a Wednesday, 2 weeks after the first 6-week trial results. AO is in the hospital. He is not in the building where the procedure is happening. He is in the hospital cafeteria, because that was the agreement he made with himself. Be close enough if needed, far enough away not to compromise anyone's professional clarity. His father Kwame is with him. They sit across from each other with tea they are not drinking and do not say very much, which is characteristic of both of them. Kwame is an engineer. He has spent his life solving problems. This is the first problem in his life that he could not solve himself, so he brought his son the books that taught his son to solve it. He does not say this. He does not need to. The procedure takes 3 hours and 40 minutes. Professor Chen comes to find Ao in the cafeteria personally. He sits down. He says, "It went exactly as planned. She's in recovery. She's asking for you." Ao stands up. He puts his tea down. He looks at his father. Kwame nods once. Ao walks to recovery. Grace Mensah is propped up on a pillow, slightly groggy from the anesthetic, looking at the door when he comes in. She looks at him for a moment. And then she says, "Ao, you look tired. Have you been eating?" He sits beside her. He takes her hand. He does not answer the question for a long time because he cannot speak. She knows him. She knows him. The neurons were not dead. They were just alone. At 12 weeks, the trial results are extraordinary. 9 of the 12 participants show measurable improvement in memory function. 3 of those 9 show improvement significant enough to move their clinical classification backward, from mid-stage to early-stage Alzheimer's. The disease is not just being slowed. In some participants, it appears to be reversing. Professor Okonkwo and Ao spend 2 weeks going over the data with the particular skepticism that genuine scientists apply to results that are too good, looking for the error, the confounding variable, the explanation that makes the finding smaller than it appears. They do not find one. The data holds. Okonkwo writes to the team at 11 p.m. after the final data verification. The results are valid. Synapse is working. We need to publish immediately, patent all derivative findings, and prepare for what comes next, because what comes next is going to be very loud and very fast, and not all of it is going to feel like celebration. She is right about all 3 things. The paper is submitted to The Lancet, the world's most prestigious medical journal, on a Friday. It is accepted for expedited publication the following Monday. The peer reviewers' comments are extraordinary in their clarity. One of them writes, in the margin of their review, "I have been reviewing medical research for 22 years. I have reviewed 4 papers in that time that I believe will be remembered as turning points in the history of medicine. This is the 5th. The Lancet paper publishes on a Tuesday morning. By Tuesday afternoon it has been covered by the BBC, The Guardian, The New York Times, Le Monde, and Der Spiegel. By Wednesday it is trending on every social media platform in the world. By Thursday, Ao Mensah's phone has received 4,700 messages that he has not been able to read. The coverage is accurate, which is not always the case when the media covers complex science. This time it is, because Professor Okonkwo has spent 2 days speaking to science journalists before publication, ensuring they understand what the paper says and, equally importantly, what it does not say. Synapse is not a cure. It is an intervention. It does not stop the disease. It restores the connections the disease has severed, and in doing so, it gives back function that seemed permanently lost. That is extraordinary. It is not the same as a cure. Okonkwo is immovable on this distinction. Ao reads the coverage on the same bus he was riding when he read the Guardian headline about his trial approval. Different morning. Different article. Same city passing by outside the window. He puts his phone in his pocket at Broad Street and does not take it out again until he reaches the university. He has not changed. The world around him has. He needs a few minutes to make sure he remains the former while navigating the latter. 3 pharmaceutical giants move on Synapse within 72 hours of the Lancet publication. Novartis from Zurich. Johnson & Johnson from New York. GlaxoSmithKline from London. Their approaches are different. Novartis sends a formal acquisition inquiry through legal channels to Professor Okonkwo's office at the university. Johnson & Johnson's chief medical officer calls Farida Hassan directly. GSK, characteristically, goes around the official channels entirely and sends a senior vice president to Birmingham on the first available flight to request an in-person meeting. Ao learns about all 3 approaches the same morning. He is 20 years old. The 3 companies approaching him have a combined market capitalization of over $1 trillion. They are offering, between them, numbers that Farida Hassan describes in their emergency call as generational wealth. Ao's response to all 3 is the same, delivered through Farida, in the same measured language. "Thank you for your interest. Synapse is not currently for sale. Mr. Mensah is focused on completing the clinical trial process. He will be in touch when that process is complete." He hangs up. He goes back to the lab. He has work to do. 3 weeks after the Lancet publication, the University of Birmingham's administration contacts Farida Hassan with a formal assertion. Synapse was developed using university facilities, university resources, and university supervision, and is therefore subject to the university's intellectual property policy, which claims a stake in all commercially significant research generated under its roof. This is not unusual. Universities do this. The policy exists. The question is whether Ao Mensah, who filed his own patent with his own attorney before the university became aware of the commercial significance of the research, is bound by a policy he was never formally made aware of when he began his work. Farida Hassan's response to the university's legal team is 32 pages long and takes 4 days to prepare. Its central argument is simple. The patent was filed before the university's IP claim was raised, the core innovation was developed independently before AO enrolled as a student, and the university's facilities were used for trial and validation of an existing concept, not for the creation of the original intellectual work. The university's legal team reads the response. They request a meeting. At the meeting, they ask for a licensing arrangement rather than ownership. Farida Hassan says, "We'll discuss licensing after the trial is complete." They agree. AO never attends any of these meetings. He is in the lab. The Phase 2 trial expands to 48 patients across 3 hospital sites in the United Kingdom. The patient profiles are broader, varying ages, varying disease stages, varying personal medical histories. This is where the science either holds under pressure or reveals its limitations. It holds. Not uniformly, the results across 48 patients are more varied than the original 12, as expected. But the core finding replicates. In patients with early to mid-stage disease, Synapse consistently produces measurable memory improvement. The mechanism works. The neurons respond to the bioelectrical bridging. The percentage of patients showing significant improvement is lower than in Phase 1, 61% versus the original 75%, but it is consistent across all 3 sites and all patient profiles, which means it is real. Grace Mensah is not in the Phase 2 trial. She completed Phase 1. At her 3-month assessment, she correctly recalled the names of all 4 of AO's childhood teachers, the year AO and Kwame built a birdhouse in the back garden, and the name of the nurse who delivered AO in the maternity ward 20 years ago. She does not remember every morning. The disease has not been eliminated, but it has been pushed back. The power lines are being restored. Some mornings she knows him immediately. Some mornings she takes a moment, but she always gets there. AO has been turning down acquisition offers for 8 months. He has turned down Novartis 3 times and Johnson & Johnson twice. He has been polite, patient, and immovable. What he has not done is raise capital, and Synapse, to scale from a clinical trial to a commercially available medical device that can reach the millions of people who need it, requires funding on a scale that no university research budget can provide. Professor Okonkwo connects him with an investor she has worked with before, a biomedical venture fund called Meridian Health Capital, run by a former cardiovascular surgeon turned fund manager named Dr. James Osei, Diana Osei's older brother, a coincidence that AO will later describe as the universe being economical with its characters. Dr. James Osei reads the Lancet paper, the Phase 2 results, and the patent documentation over a single weekend. He calls Okonkwo on Monday. "This is the most significant biomedical finding of the decade," he says. "Possibly the century." Okonkwo says, "I know. That's why I called you instead of anyone else." Osei says, "What does he want?" Okonkwo says, "Ask him yourself." The meeting with AO is on Friday. It runs 4 hours. At the end of it, AO has $60 million, complete IP ownership preserved, a governance clause protecting Synapse's humanitarian access mandate, and, in Osei, an investor who spent 20 years as a surgeon and understands that some things are more important than the return. With $60 million in the bank, AO founds Synapse Technologies Limited. He keeps the company in Birmingham. He hires his first team from the UK's biomedical engineering community, researchers, clinicians, regulatory specialists, and engineers who share not just the technical skills but the specific conviction that this technology belongs to patients first and shareholders second. Professor Okonkwo joins the company's scientific advisory board. Farida Hassan becomes general counsel. Professor Chin from Queen Elizabeth Hospital joins as chief medical officer. The security guard Arthur, who left flasks of tea outside the lab door for 2 years without being asked, is invited to the company launch event. Comes. He sits in the front row. When AO gives the opening address, he makes eye contact with Arthur and nods. Arthur nods back. The company's founding charter contains a clause that every investor, every board member, and every new employee is required to read before signing anything. It states, Synapse exists because of a woman named Grace Mensah, who taught her son to love the science of the human brain, and who was later diagnosed with a disease that science had accepted it could not reverse. Synapse Technologies is the answer to that acceptance. Our mission is not commercial primacy. Our mission is to reach every patient who needs this technology, regardless of geography, income, or insurance status. Everything else is in service of that mission. The clause is not negotiable. It never has been. It never will be. Getting Synapse approved by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration is the most complex regulatory challenge AO has faced. The FDA's medical device approval process for a Class 3 implantable device, the highest risk category, which Synapse qualifies as, requires years of documentation, multiple trial phases, and an inspection of manufacturing processes that do not yet exist at commercial scale. AO begins the process anyway, simultaneously building the UK commercial approval track and the US one, because the United States represents 40% of the global market for Alzheimer's care and because there are 6 million Americans living with Alzheimer's disease right now who cannot wait for a sequential process. The FDA panel review of Synapse takes place on a Thursday in Washington. The panel is 12 specialists, neurologists, neurosurgeons, bioethicists, and patient advocates. AO presents for 90 minutes. He is 22 years old. He answers questions for 3 more hours. At the end of the session, the panel chair, a woman who has reviewed 400 medical devices in her career, looks at AO and says, Mr. Mensah, I want to ask you one question that is not in our standard protocol. Why did you build this? AO is quiet for a moment. Then he says, my mother forgot my name. I decided that was not acceptable. The chair writes something down. She does not look up. Later, in the panel's deliberation notes, next to the recommendation to approve, she writes a single line. The inventor understands the stakes. The device reflects that. Novartis, having been turned down 3 times through official channels, changes strategy. In the spring of year 4, Synapse Technologies begins receiving what Farida Hassan identifies as a coordinated pressure campaign, regulatory challenges filed in 2 European markets that slow the commercialization timeline, a series of articles in financial publications suggesting that Synapse's trial results are overstated, and an approach to 3 of Synapse's early investors suggesting that a Novartis acquisition would be more financially advantageous than continued independence. The articles are written by journalists working from briefing documents that Farida's team traces, through a legal discovery process, to a PR firm that represents Novartis. The regulatory challenges are legitimate on their face but timed and structured with a precision that speaks of strategy rather than genuine concern. AO's response is not legal, at least not initially. It is scientific. He invites the editors of the publications that ran the critical articles to visit Queen Elizabeth Hospital Birmingham and speak directly with 3 Phase 2 trial participants, 2 of them, with their consent, publicly identified. One is a former banker named Robert who was unable to recognize his wife at the start of the trial. At the time of the journalist's visit, he greets them by name, describes their publications accurately, and recalls, without prompting, what each of them has previously written about Synapse. He smiles at them. He says, I read the articles. The data speaks for itself. I am the data. 2 of the 3 publications run corrections. The 3rd declines. Farida files a lawsuit. It settles within 6 weeks. In the same month that Farida files the lawsuit against the 3rd publication, Synapse receives a positive appraisal from NICE, the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, the body that determines which treatments are recommended for use across the National Health Service in England. The appraisal means that Synapse will be funded by the NHS for eligible patients. For the first time in the history of this technology, a person living with Alzheimer's disease in England does not need private insurance or personal wealth to access it. It is available on the NHS, free at the point of delivery. When the NICE approval comes through, AO is in the lab. He gets the notification on his phone. He reads it twice. He puts his phone down. He picks up his notebook. He goes to a clean page. He writes the date. He writes 1 sentence. Today, anyone in England with early to mid-stage Alzheimer's can access Synapse. He closes the notebook. He calls his mother. She answers on the 2nd ring. AO, she says. Immediately. No pause. No flicker. Just his name, said the way she has always said it. He says, hey mum. She says, are you eating? He says, yes. He is lying. She knows. She always knows. In year 5, with NHS deployment underway, FDA approval secured, and commercial rollout beginning in 12 countries, Synapse Technologies completes a Series B funding round that values the company at £5 billion, approximately $6.2 billion. AO Mensah is 23 years old. He is the youngest person in history to found a biomedical company valued at over $5 billion. He is also, by almost every financial measure, a billionaire. Forbes runs a cover story. The headline, The Boy Who Gave Back Memory. AO hates the headline. He calls it reductive and slightly sentimental and not entirely accurate. His publicist, a very patient woman named Claire who has been managing his media relationships for 2 years, tells him the headline is fine and that being on the Forbes cover is not something to argue about. He disagrees. He does not win this argument. What he does instead, without telling Claire, who finds out from reading it online, is write a 12-paragraph public response to the Forbes article in which he credits Professor Okonkwo, Professor Chen, Farida Hassan, Dr. James Osei, Arthur the security guard, and every trial participant by name. It goes more viral than the Forbes cover. Claire says this is unmanageable. AO says it is accurate. They are both right. The first thing AO does after the Series B closes is not buy anything. He launches the Synapse Global Access Program, a structured initiative to make Synapse available in low and middle-income countries at a tiered pricing model designed so that the manufacturing cost, not the profit margin, determines what patients pay. The program is funded by a combination of the Series B proceeds, a grant from the Wellcome Trust, and a partnership with the World Health Organization that took 8 months to negotiate and that Dr. Osei describes as the single most important commercial decision made in his investing career. The first country outside the UK and US to receive Synapse through the Global Access Program is Ghana, the country where AO's parents were born, where his grandparents live, where the family name Mensah comes from. The rollout begins at the Koralbu Teaching Hospital in Accra. AO flies out for the opening. He stands in a hospital in Ghana, in the country his parents left with 2 suitcases and a belief in education, and he watches a doctor explain Synapse to a family. The device he built in a university lab in Birmingham is about to be implanted in someone's grandmother in Accra. He thinks about his own grandmother. He thinks about his mother. He thinks about the neurons that are not dead, just alone. He thinks, we are getting there. By the end of year 6, Synapse has been implanted in 100,000 patients across 19 countries. The clinical data from that cohort, the largest real-world dataset on neural interface outcomes ever assembled, confirms and extends everything the trials showed. In patients with early to mid-stage Alzheimer's, Synapse consistently produces clinically meaningful improvement in memory function. The 61% response rate from phase 2 holds across the broader population. But the number that changes everything is not the response rate. It is the 39,000 families who report, in a global patient experience survey, that Synapse gave them back conversations they thought were gone forever. 39,000 people who heard their names said with recognition by someone they love, on a morning they expected to be just another loss. AO reviews the patient experience data the same way he reviews the clinical data, methodically, completely, looking for what is true and what it means. He reads 39,000 survey responses. Not summaries. The actual responses. He hires a team to analyze them. He reads their analysis. And then he sits in his office in Birmingham on a Thursday evening and writes, in his notebook, the question he has been asking since he was 17 years old in his bedroom, surrounded by printed papers, after his mother's diagnosis. Can the neurons be restored? And beneath it, in the same handwriting, yes. On AO's 24th birthday, his father Kwame organizes a family dinner. Not a celebration event, a family dinner. The same kitchen table. The same food Grace has cooked on birthdays since AO was born. The same people who were there at the beginning. The family, close friends, Professor Okonkwo, Farida Hassan. After dinner, Kwame stands up. He does not make speeches. He is an engineer. He communicates in structures, not in words. But tonight he has prepared something. He says, when your mother was diagnosed, I did not know how to help her. I am an engineer. I can fix structures. I cannot fix biology. But I remembered that I had raised an engineer of a different kind. A person who, when he encounters a structure that is failing, does not accept the failure. Yes, why? And then he asks what to do about it. He pauses. He looks at his son. You asked both questions. You found both answers. You did what I could not do. And you did it while doing the dishes and catching the bus and eating cereal at the kitchen table. He raises his glass. Happy birthday. You are a very good engineer. That is the whole speech. AO will quote it for the rest of his life. In year 7, AO Mensah and Professor Adiz Okonkwo are jointly nominated for the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine. The nomination is made by a consortium of 14 leading neuroscientists from 8 countries, citing Synapse as the most significant advance in the treatment of neurodegenerative disease in the history of clinical medicine. They do not win it that year. The prize goes to a team of researchers who have spent 40 years on a foundational discovery in cellular biology. AO, when asked about the nomination in interviews, says consistently, the nomination is an extraordinary honor. The researchers who won this year have spent longer than I've been alive on work that makes everything I've built possible. It's the right outcome. He means it. This is not false modesty. He genuinely means it. Professor Okonkwo is less gracious about the loss, privately, which is one of the reasons AO loves her. She calls him the night the winners are announced and says, we were robbed. AO laughs for a long time. She says, I'm not laughing. He says, I know. That's why I'm laughing for both of us. She is quiet for a moment. Then she says, next year. He says, or the year after. Or never. It doesn't change what we built. She says, no, it doesn't. They stay on the phone for another 40 minutes, talking about the next version of Synapse. This is how they celebrate and how they grieve. With the next problem. 7 years after the first Tuesday morning in the doorway. 7 years after the cup of tea and the not knowing and the decision. Grace Mensah is 60 years old. She is not cured. AO has never used that word and will not, because the disease is still present, still progressing at its reduced pace, still taking small things. But the Synapse device has held the power lines open. The buildings are still lit. Most mornings she knows him before he reaches the kitchen. On a Tuesday morning in October, the same day of the week, in the same house, in a small symmetry that nobody planned, Grace Mensah is at the kitchen table when AO comes downstairs. She looks up. She says his name before he speaks. She says, sit down. I made you tea. He sits. The tea is too strong, the way she has always made it. He drinks it without saying anything. She watches him drink it. She says, you still look tired. He says, I'm okay, Mum. She says, I know you are. He looks at her. She is looking at him with the full, clear, specific attention of someone who knows exactly who they are looking at. The neurons were not dead. They were just alone. And he brought them back to each other. The second generation of Synapse is not designed for Alzheimer's. It is designed for Parkinson's disease, traumatic brain injury, and, in the most speculative arm of the research program, the one that keeps the scientific advisory board up at night, depression and treatment-resistant mental health conditions. The underlying mechanism is the same, bioelectrical bridging of isolated or disrupted neural pathways. But the targets are different, the calibration more complex, the ethical questions more layered. AO has spent 2 years building the research program and bringing in specialists in each condition. He does not claim to know how to solve these problems yet. He knows how to build the team that will. At the launch of the Synapse 2.0 research program, AO gives an address to his team. He says, I have one rule for this program. One rule. We do not call anything impossible until we have asked the question I have been asking since I was 17 years old. Are the neurons dead, or are they just alone? In every condition we are studying, in every patient cohort, in every dataset we will ever produce, that is the question. Not, can it be fixed? First, what is actually happening? Ask the first question honestly and the second question becomes possible. Never skip to the second question. Start with what is true. He steps back from the podium. The team goes to work. 9 years after A.O. Mensah stood in a doorway holding a cup of tea, the first Synapse 2.0 result for Parkinson's disease comes in. A 68-year-old man named Thomas, who has had Parkinson's for 11 years and who had largely lost the use of his right hand, wakes up on a Wednesday morning, picks up his cup of tea without shaking, and calls his daughter. He does not say anything when she answers. He just holds the phone. She asks what is wrong. He says, nothing. Nothing is wrong. I'm holding the phone with my right hand. She starts crying immediately. He does not. He just sits there, holding the phone with his right hand that has not obeyed him in 11 years, completely still, completely present. The clinical team photographs the assessment data. They call A.O. He is in Birmingham. He is on his way to the university. He stops walking when they tell him. He stands on the pavement on a Wednesday morning in Birmingham and he feels something expand in his chest that has no name in any language he knows. The neurons were not dead. They were just alone. And it is not just Alzheimer's. It is bigger than Alzheimer's. The question he has been asking is bigger than he knew. The answer is still yes. In year 10, A.O. Mensah is invited to address the World Health Assembly in Geneva, the governing body of the World Health Organization, attended by health ministers from 194 countries. It is the most significant platform in global health. He is 28 years old. He prepares for 3 weeks. Not the speech itself. He writes that in 2 hours, because he has known what he wants to say since the morning he stood in a doorway with a cup of tea and made a decision. He prepares by reading every brief, every country profile, every epidemiological dataset on neurodegenerative and neurological disease globally. He wants to know the scale of the problem he is speaking into. He wants every number in his head before he stands at that podium. His speech contains one sentence that will be quoted in the global press for a decade. He says it near the end, after the clinical data and the global access figures and the program roadmap. He says, every neurodegenerative patient in the world has, at some point, been told by a doctor that their condition is progressive and irreversible and that the goal is management, not recovery. I'm standing here today to tell you, as directly as I can, that we were wrong. The goal is recovery. The technology exists. The only question remaining is whether we have the collective will to make it available to every person who needs it, regardless of where they were born or how much money they have. That is not a medical question. That is a question of what we believe people are worth. He pauses. The assembly is silent. Then it is not silent. The applause lasts 4 minutes. 10 years after the beginning. A Tuesday morning. The same house. The same street. The curtains are drawn. The kettle is beginning to boil. A.O. Mensah is 28 years old. He leads the world's most significant biomedical research company. His work has reached 160,000 patients. His mother knows his name every morning now. Most mornings, reliably, with a kind of consistency that stopped being a miracle 3 years ago and started being simply Tuesday. He makes 2 cups of tea. He carries them upstairs. He knocks on his mother's door. She says, "Come in." He opens the door. She is sitting up in bed reading. She looks up. "A.O.," she says. Immediately. No flicker. Just his name. He hands her the tea. He sits in the chair beside her bed, the same chair he pulled up 10 years ago when she looked at him like a stranger. She wraps both hands around the cup. She says, "You're here early." He says, "I wanted to see you before work." She says, "How's the work going?" He says, "We got another result yesterday. Parkinson's stage 3. The patient held a pen for the first time in 8 years. She looks at him. She says, "Good." Just that. As if it is the most obvious outcome in the world. As if she never doubted it would come. As if she always knew, from the Saturday mornings in her classroom with a small boy in the front row who couldn't stop learning, that this is exactly where the story was going to end up. He drinks his tea. She reads her book. The kettle finishes boiling in the kitchen below. The city begins its day. The neurons fire. The connections hold. The lights stay on. Our story isn't rare. It's just rarely told honestly. Because success built on something real, on sacrifice, on obsession, on refusing to accept what everyone else accepted, feels invisible until the world finally notices it. And then everyone wonders why they didn't see it coming. The truth is, these stories were always there. In garages and bedrooms and hospital corridors and school cafeterias. In the people who stayed up later, asked harder questions, and refused to close the window on something the rest of the world wasn't ready to look at yet. If this story made you think differently about power, ambition, and how success really works, then you belong here. Subscribe to the channel. Because we don't just tell stories of people who rise fast. We reveal what it actually took to get there, what they risked to stay there, and what the world looked like before anyone believed they could. This is the Dawn Film Vault. We don't just tell the story. We tell the truth of it. See you in the next one.